social data emerged as a promising new layer for segmenting and targeting audiences. After years of chasing and tracking users, suddenly we had a whole class of users who were willingly giving us data, even profiling themselves. And suddenly social media not only seemed like a more reliable form of audience segmentation, but the massive amounts of data that it produced became, and the social graph produced, itself seemed to address behavioral targeting's persistent problems of achieving scale. So this whole new category of companies sort of came into the market just 3 or 4 years ago, but everyone had their own take on how you parse and segment that data, which part of the social profile mattered most, whose friends mattered most within the social graph, and then how do you take advertising and target against that data. And now it's been several years, and we thought it was a good time to review once again where social media is in terms of its ability to target, what we've learned, and also how the companies differentiate themselves in the market now, several years into this. We put this within the form of our Grill the Vendors panel, in which we invite in a group of vendors from within a category to talk about what they do, what they've learned, how they differentiate themselves from one another, and to some degree defend their models, whether they really do work, whether this layer of data has proven itself out, as we once expected that it would, to really add to the stack. To take up this, to fire up the Barbie on this Grill the Vendors session, we have James Yancey, who's the VP of Global Strategy for IgnitionOne. He provides campaign management and optimization tools for clients of the company, including GM, Chicos, and Fiat, and agencies Digitas and MRM. Please welcome James Yancey.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, Steve was really trying to push me to fire up the Barbie. He picked a guy from Atlanta, so probably the wrong city. He picked a New Yorker. That was my advice, but here we are. So yeah, just to fire this off, this is supposed to be a fairly upbeat session, not necessarily pitching the companies, but let's get down really to the heart of the matter and some of the crux of the issues around using social graph data. What is it? What is it not? What are some of the trends? What are some of the concerns in the industry? Secondarily, they've listed my phone number, so if anyone wants to go on a date tonight, no. It's if you want to text a question, please feel free to text me during the hours of this. Afterward, then it's a different story. But if you guys text me the questions, as we get through some of the main ones, we'll jump into those. And I assume that someone will eventually call time on us. So just quickly, we're going to go through, we're actually, and there might be one other person joining us. So if Nikhil comes in the room from Adaptly, he might join us as well up on the panel. But just quickly, we'll go through, allow people to, in a couple of sentences, not the soapbox, a couple of quick sentences, what you guys do, and then we'll ask some quick questions. So Allie, should we start with you?
Sure. My name's Allie Klein. I work with 33 Across, and we, as of a few weeks ago, operate the world's largest social and interest graph. So we have about 1.25 billion users worldwide that we map on a monthly basis. And we also build what's called a brand graph for each of our marketer and publisher clients. So we can talk more about that, but hopefully everyone's familiar. No soapbox.
Sounds
and
good.
I'm dateless.
Oh, okay, all right, perfect. All right, you have my number now, so we're set.
I mean, we're all good.
There we go, success. All right, Richard, you want to tell us a little about?
Sure,
Yes.
I'm Richard Kruger, and I work with a company called MicroStrategy. We're a leader in business intelligence software, and now we're applying that technology to the social graph and providing businesses with intelligence on their fan base.
Perfect. That was nice, short, and sweet. Good job.
My name is Andrew Panzer. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Media 6 Degrees. Media 6 Degrees is focused on prospecting. We find new customers for marketers, and we do this by watching where a marketer's actual customers cluster around the web. Understanding that, we then go find individuals who have a similar pattern of where they cluster around the web, and we market to them.
Okay, great. So, Ali, just first off, do you consider these two guys like core competitors? Do you consider them directly in the same space, or do you consider them slightly different than 33 Across?
Well, Richard's probably intentionally placed between Andrew and I. No, I'm kidding. I think that if you had asked me that question last quarter, at Q4, I would have said absolutely Media 6 and 33 Across are among a very small set of companies advocating audience expansion, predictive loyalty. I think we recently acquired a company called Tint, which has had a pretty dramatic impact on our business and our focus. And so I think we're probably less closely connected and more see them as kind of a co-advocate in the space for the evangelism and use of a social graph.
Okay. Andrew,
I don't know, Andrew, you may
yeah,
have
Andrew,
something.
do you agree with that? Is it the same or different?
Yeah, a little bit of a different take. I think when we both started the companies around the same time, 2007, 2008 time frame, and probably about the first 2 to 3 years of our existence, we were definitely doing a lot of similar things. Both companies took an idea of how to address data and connections, and what happened was we split, probably around mid to late 2009, very different approaches. And so actually, and I've known their CEO for a while, we don't see 33 Across as a competitor. We see 33 Across as a competitor in the same way we see anybody competing for advertising dollars, but our approaches are so dramatically different. We think that anybody doing marketing should be looking at both approaches because they both work incredibly well.
Okay, great. That's a nice little softball to get into the approach here in just a second. So Richard, Mr. Nice Guy in the middle. So just quickly, and Richard, you are part of a company that does a number of things, right? So it's not just social graph data. Specifically, how long have you guys been around, and what are some of the other areas that you touch on? Just very brief.
I think we're the longest company that you never heard of. We've been around for 21 years. We're publicly traded. We do about $600 million in sales a year. We have most of the Fortune 1000 companies as clients, and we're really involved with big data, providing analysis on that data. And as I said, now we have a suite of social enterprise offerings to take advantage of your Facebook fan data.
Okay, perfect. So and just for context and reference, how long have you guys been around, Ali?
We've been around since 2008.
Okay, and Andrew, yes.
Company started in 2007.
2000, it was about the same. Okay, gotcha. Perfect. So let's get right into it. I think one of the issues that we've talked about, and one of the themes is, what is social graph data? Is social graph data, is that social media? And are those things, one and the same, or are they distinctly different? And so just to kind of, carve out the context of the conversation, why don't we start with Andrew specifically, like social media, social graph data, one and the same, different, like what's the context there?
Yeah, I think the term social has become sort of bastardized over the past few years. When you say social, people think of Facebook and Twitter, and some others as well, and probably in many cases rightfully so. But really, the idea of social and social targeting originated about the concept of around sociology and the social sciences, the study of how people cluster together into communities. And that happens across the entire web. All data, everything that happens on the web is inherently social. And so for us, we started our business looking at social networks, sharing sites, things of that nature. And what we found was all data acts similarly for our models, and therefore we just started looking across the entire web, whether it's publishing sites, whether it's sharing applications, whether it is blog networks, social networks, Twitter, you name it, it all feeds what some people would consider to be the social graph. And what we do is we look for how people cluster together across all of this data. But it's not specifically social networks.
Okay. Richard, do you agree, disagree?
Well, actually, we're singularly focused on Facebook data. And to us, when you say social graph data, you're specifically talking about the Facebook social graph.
Okay. And Ali, any?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with both. I mean, there's absolutely very rich consumer behavior, trending, and predictive information within social, which is largely today Facebook data. Although you see with dating sites, for example, which would be an earlier, social network data source, that pool is actually extremely rich in terms of predictive nature and also in terms of we've seen advertiser effectiveness. I think, though, to Andrew's point, something that's really, really powerful and necessary to understand on a go-forward basis is that how consumers behave and act, what they like, what they do in Facebook is not necessarily the only piece to the equation in order to successfully leverage a graph. And the important shift we're starting to see in market is brands starting to think about, okay, how do my brand set, what's the social graph around that set? What's the interest graph around that set? Not so much as to, okay, well, how do I insert and attach and become stronger? How do I acquire more likes, even though there's a 1% on average engagement rate of likes? Like, we've been in this race to kind of get to the social graph, and now we're kind of saying, okay, now let's actually understand what's the unique graph around my brand, and that's the huge opportunity, is because it truly is a unique graph around every brand.
So Richard, just out of curiosity, why is it that you guys only focus on Facebook data and not the other points?
Well, I think because it's such rich data about the user, and we're all about customer information. And if you look at Facebook, it's really the largest registry of, aside from demographic and profiling data, of likes and opinions and interests on the web. And we are capturing a lot of that data.
Okay, so just saying categorically, just so we understand from the other two companies, like, so there's Facebook as a category and source of data. What are some other, we say, broad categories of social data or social graph data that we pull in that's not Facebook? What are we talking about, just to be clear?
See, for us, it's very different. For us, we don't look beyond a cookie visiting a URL, and we don't even care what that URL is. What we care about are that multiple cookies visiting the same URL. So it doesn't matter if it's social graph in a social network, doesn't matter if it's a publisher site, large or small, doesn't matter if it's a shopping site. It's the fact that cookies have shared visitation patterns. And we do this at massive, massive scale. And what you see are just cookies clustering at websites, cookies clustering on URLs.
So for
the
you,
beautiful
you
thing
can be
about
the whole
this
domain
is
of the web, basically. There doesn't have to be any specific types of data. You don't have to say
doesn't matter.
Right. It's more of the pattern of the interaction between the different cookie IDs and the URLs, and where is that interest?
Exactly.
Okay.
And again, the URLs we don't even care about either. So the beautiful thing about this is it's privacy by design. We don't know any demographic or psychographic information about the user. Gotcha. We don't know or care about the sites that they visit. It's just about specifically understanding the interaction and overlap between cookies, and then basically inserting marketer behavior. So somebody going to a marketer's website and then understanding how that person interacts, or that cookie interacts with other polls.
Gotcha. So yours, to be clear, it's patterns of behavior, looking at cookies and URLs. It's not related to the individual.
Correct.
Right. And 33 across, just in very general sense, same or different?
Also cookies. A big portion of our data also is, consumer sharing behaviors across the web. So copy, pasting content, sharing patterns on and off Facebook into other environments, cookie-based interactions, connectivity, and the strength of influence.
So is it related to individuals, or is it just Cookies, okay. And so for you guys, for Facebook data, cookies or individual data? Or
So we're taking a very different approach, and we have an enterprise offering that helps you understand who your fans are better. Yeah. It puts that data into a relational database.
So because they're your fans, obviously you can access the data, right? So different approach. Right.
We're strictly within the guidelines of Facebook. We don't sell that data to other marketers. We also have a free tool, an app called Wisdom, and you could go to wisdom.com, and that's a collective intelligence app that shows you the likes of 7 million Facebook fans that have opted in for that.
Okay.
So through that, you could do some really interesting ad targeting.
Okay. So perfect. So that sets the stage. I mean, you guys have, we're getting into specifics here in a minute, but broadly, similar patterns of collecting data, looking at data, slightly different in that this is really enterprise software. You're using your own data from your own fan pages. You're better understand your audience, interacting with that audience, right?
Right, and that's sort of the social CRM, I guess.
Social CRM. Called. Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so basically the crux of this is really going to get into, okay, if we compare social graph data to other things, is it better or is it worse? And so we're going to define what those other things are, and we'll get into it in a second. But in a single sentence, or maybe two, not three, can we go over what is the conceptual difference between your two companies? And Richard, not Mr. Nice Guy in the middle, but
sure, I'll take a stab at this. From my understanding, and we'll go through, and we'll hear from 33 across. They're focused on true connections, people actually sharing. We're not. We're focused on shared visitation of websites. That seems to be the key difference, at least based upon our understanding.
When you say shared visitation websites, I would interpret that more as a traffic pattern between
exactly.
the websites.
Cookies overlapping at URLs.
Yeah. Okay. And is that
Sorry.
fairly
No, I
accurate, or-
think that's, yes.
And so when he says, so you guys focus on sharing, what does that mean? Like, what would be the difference between looking at traffic patterns versus, what does that mean, sharing?
So for those of you that have been sitting through a lot of the sessions today, we've heard a lot about, right, the psychology behind social behavior, behind consumer behavior, sharing habits, why, Facebook has made, and I think to the point, I'm not sure which one of you made earlier, sorry, but everything has become social, right, because Facebook is defined as social. But in theory, our culture has become more social than it ever has before because of all of these vast tools. And so our belief is pretty straightforward, that my tendency to be connected with you and the strength of our connection, like we're going out on a date later, or like we're just sitting on a panel, whatever that difference is, and how I communicate with you and which tools is definitely directional over my influence over you, and therefore my word of mouth influence, whether I'm sitting here talking to you about it in front of a lot of people, whether I'm sharing it over a computer, or whether I'm just happening to tell you, and we're tapping into that word of mouth.
So just to boil it down, really, when we're talking about sharing, is it more like how you share what you're sharing? So it's not, so we think about the model with M60, it's more about where the traffic's going, what the clusters are, and for you guys, and I'm just trying to break this down so it's clear. So for you guys, it's more in line with not just where the traffic's going, how it's clustered, but it's the mode of sharing, like how they're actually doing the share, and that's relevant?
It's not necessarily how they're actually doing a share, it's how likely and how strong the connections are between those individual cookies.
Okay. All right, makes sense. All right, so let's get into the heart of it in terms of really the purpose of this panel is to talk about whether or not social graph data is a viable way to target advertising, target consumers, make good business decisions. So let's start by defining what the other options are. What are we comparing social graph data to? Who wants to respond to that? What are the options? If you're talking to a marketer and a brand, what are they trying to decide? What are their data options?
Okay, forget about data options. Think about targeting options.
That's probably a better way to, yes.
And typically, you have everything starting from at the bottom funnel moving up. Bottom funnel, you have search, you have retargeting. Then you have moving up the chain, you'll have behavioral targeting, contextual targeting, all the way up to demo and run of network. What we have seen consistently since the beginning of from the origin of our business is that social targeting performs not as well as retargeting, which is fine. Retargeting is a very effective tool, but it performs better than any other form of targeting that we are put up against. Better than behavioral, better than contextual, better than demo and psychographic. And that is to the tune of when we see on average, and we have the luxury of data being shared back to us by our marketers, typically around 5x on an ROI basis of the other forms of targeting.
So retargeting generally would be the best method from what you've seen in terms of the results that are achieved, the actual conversions. So we look at conversion.
On the surface, yes. There's a little bit about retargeting that's being sort of coming up to the surface these days about an overweighting on retargeting. Retargeting works really well, but measurement systems, multi-touch attribution, they're catching up. And what they're starting to see, and what we're starting to see, is that retargeting is definitely getting some level of credit for conversions that would have happened anyway. Retargeting is getting overweighted for last touch attribution. As full funnel attribution comes into play, multi-touch attribution becomes common within our industry. What we're starting to see is that those upper funnel tactics, mid funnel tactics, whether it's social targeting, whether it's advertising on a publisher site directly, are having a higher level of influence towards conversion than people have ever given it credit for.
Okay. So we're going to come back to proof points in a minute. I know you said there's some data, so we'll dig into that in just a second. You were going to just respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think our biggest advice to anyone running any of those kinds of targeting is, from a retargeting perspective, it is extremely effective to target someone that's already been, pre-qualified to be low-hanging fruit. But be very, very careful that when you buy social targeting or when you buy behavioral targeting, that everyone's not chiming on that retargeting, right? Anytime a pixel is down, anytime a third party asks you to put their pixel down on their page, the most important question you should ask is, are you going to retarget my consumers? Because you most likely already have another retargeting vendor that's doing that. And the true measure of effectiveness of any of these solutions, whether it's something we do, whether it's what M6D does, whether it's, whomever, everyone is kind of played in that retargeting pool, and it is all starting to filter out. But be sure to ask that question. That would be my main parent advice around all of this.
It's a very good point. You also wind up bidding against yourself in the exchanges if you have somebody doing retargeting and you have a vendor doing other forms of targeting who are blending it with retargeting.
Yeah. But on the performance side, I would just also say, I think one of the issues around social targeting that has also happened is Facebook, and they're working back against that, and you guys are probably a big part of that right now because they're starting to deliver who's talking about metrics, things that really measure engagement and that help understand the true value of a like and a fan. But the DR metric is not, it's an understandable low-hanging fruit, but there is a ton of brand success around tapping in to influence, social connections, interest, that whole graph. There is huge success there to the tune of everything from lifts in tune-in to lifts in purchase intent. So upper funnel, let's fill it, and then let's move them all the way through. The graph, when you identify that graph around your brand, it is an unbelievable thing to watch for brand marketing.
So, but do you agree with Andrew's comment that if you're going to look at the spectrum of marketing from the data that you guys have seen from your own clients, that remarketing would be the single channel that, from looking at conversion data, there's a more clear-cut case than social graph data, but you don't see any other channels outperforming?
No, I would only agree with that in the movement from favorability from intent to purchase. That's it. That's the only place where I would see. The weakest part of retargeting, if you talk to any of the big direct marketers, Sprint, right, all the telecom guys, huge on auto and finance, they'll tell you, our issue right now isn't figuring out how to convert intenders. We're really good at that. Like, guess what? We spend billions and billions and billions of dollars a month, some of them, we got that. What we need your help with is, how do I get the most qualified user in the upper funnel, and how do I help move them down pace by pace by pace at a way in which is thickening and making it less of a funnel and making it more of a tunnel.
So, and Richard, just to put this in the context of what you guys do, I guess for most marketers, they would primarily be exhausting their own consumers, their own direct data, et cetera, and then they would probably go to companies like these to then expand the audience and look for new customers and use a social graph for that. Am I thinking of that the right way? Hi, this is our special guest, Nikhil. Let's give it up for Nikhil. Woo! Sorry, it's actually not Nikhil's fault. We started a little bit early, so he.
And I just flew in from the UK, so.
Yeah, and he flew in from the UK. So anyway, so sorry, Nikhil. And before I'm going to come back to you, Richard. So just so you can introduce yourself, we haven't said anything important so far, so don't. Cool. No, I'm just kidding. No, just kidding. It's just a joke. We're going on a date later. It's fine. That's all you missed. So Nikhil, give us quickly two sentences. Like, what do you guys do? And I'll bring you up to speed on what we're talking about.
My name is Nikhil Sethi, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Adaptly. Essentially, what we're doing is we're a media buying technology for social. So we plug into ad platforms of Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, StumbleUpon, YouTube, a bunch of other systems, and allow our agencies and brands to scale media across those platforms.
So you're basically the ad management platform for social.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
That's right.
Great. So we're just talking about data, and we're talking about different types of companies, and we're basically on the topic now of the effectiveness of social graph data compared to other channels. And we're just talking about retargeting, and we're asking opinions as to whether or not we see retargeting as the only channel from pure conversion data that's more effective than social graph data. So that's where. So I'll come back to you in a second and bring you into the conversation.
Thanks for everyone's patience.
So Richard, I was going to ask you. So am I thinking about it the right way in that for the kind of company, the kind of service that you offer, brands would have already basically exacerbated all of those uses of their direct data from their clients, and they come to companies like these then to expand their audience using social graph.
And that is correct. And
okay.
we have found specifically within Facebook to look at a subset's likes and affinities. is a really valuable way to target new audiences and,
Okay.
and find them.
Okay. So we're going to come back to the data question in just a second and proof points behind what you guys just said. But to get into, so that's great. So conceptually makes sense. I understand what you're doing. I understand the differences. So how do you actually, when we say great, so you're working with a brand or a client, what does that mean? Like, how do they actually use your data, your APIs? You know, what do they do? What does that mean? Like, so you can say they use social graph data, but how are they receiving that data from you guys, and how are they then taking it into their universe and applying it? So, Andrew,
Well, we don't sell data.
Okay.
We execute with a full service platform that looks like just looks like an ad network.
Okay.
We provide a level of insight and transparency with that, and we are able to just basically deliver against, with their creative against the audiences that they are trying to reach online.
So display ads powered by the social graph that you guys will directionally show them.
Exactly,
Okay.
powered by our
Perfect.
data science.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Anything else?
we layer a marketer's brand against our massive social graph, and that outputs a brand graph. And that brand graph maps physically what the social attributes are of that consumer base, what the demographic attributes are of that consumer base, what their interests are, and then how big that universe is. And then they buy media through us to all the people within that graph. And that graph changes over time.
Okay. And what kind of media can they buy?
Anything from video, rich, standard IAB, whatever.
But all display.
All display.
Okay. So display inventory, and in terms of, basically they're logging into their account via your platform. They can understand their own audience. And what do they do with that? So they can learn more about their Facebook audience, and then what? What do they actually do?
So then they could go and purchase with more intelligence within Facebook.
Purchase what? Like who would purchase?
Ads.
Okay. So basically they're using your data specifically on Facebook based on the fans they already have to better target their Facebook ads.
Correct. And actually we also offer a full solution where you're able to segment your audience and then message them directly either through Facebook or through email, if that's
Gotcha.
one of the permissions you're granted.
Gotcha. Okay. So Nikhil, basically with your technology, you're managing ads on these different social platforms. What does that mean, by the way? What social platforms are we talking about when we say you can manage things?
So we actually plug directly into the inventory of Facebook, of StumbleUpon, of Twitter, of LinkedIn, of YouTube, and a couple other ones that we're now integrated into. But I think the big difference in terms of the way we view the data world is the fact that kind of all the data points that we get from these social partners are first-party data points. So this is not a lookalike model. This is not something that we're kind of building and trying to create a secondary graph off of. We're looking at exactly the data points that's coming from the consumers of these sites, and as a result, you end up with really, really accurate data, right? So we're talking about 85 to 95% accuracy in terms of if I'm saying I'm hitting a 35-year-old woman in Minnesota, I know exactly that I'm hitting that person, and there is no guess around that. So I guess the difference in terms of how we're executing that data against it is a couple things, right? If you think about the famous Lumascape, right? Having each of those components kind of required for the display execution. In the social world, we've kind of taken all of those components and just condensed it into one single stack, right? So if you think about it just from kind of pure DMP sense, we can extract all the data like this gentleman was talking about from Facebook, from Twitter, from all these other places, and actually segment that and use it for all sorts of other things outside of social as well. I'll give a quick example. One of our customers is a large beverage, and we actually took a bunch of their assets and threw it onto social, and just like an intelligent panel, we're able to pull out, again, this highly accurate first-party data on who was resonating against those units and apply it to their out-of-home execution. So it's this kind of really interesting environment where, within the social property itself, it's all cookieless, right? So all the data is coming in this sort of first-party fashion.
Okay. So again, just for the sake of clarity, so basically we have display inventory, right? And then we have basically buying ads on Facebook. We have display inventory. And then so in your case, you're not buying any media, but you're a technology platform, but you're buying ads across all the different social networks. So just to be clear, you were mentioning first-party data versus third-party data. And I think specifically what you mean is when you're buying ads on those social networks, you're buying it based on the targeting data through that social network, meaning that if I buy an ad on Facebook and I want to target someone who's 33 and lives in New York and likes tic-tac-toe, then I'll know that specifically versus basically summarize third-party data that's directionally showing you where interest lies.
That's
a good
absolutely
way
right.
to sum it up? Okay, perfect. So let's get into, we talked about, right before you joined, we were just talking about, as you look at investment does it make sense to invest? I guess there's two different ways we think about this. I'm just trying to put it all in the same plane because you guys do different things with different types of businesses. I guess we're talking about investment in channels, first of all, and then we're talking about the way you target the channels that you invest in. So in this case, we're making the argument you should invest in display for both 33 across and M6D. And then the question really is, should you invest that money in remarketing or should you invest that money in targeting through the social graph, and what's better? And then I guess with MicroStrategy, it's really just a question of how can you best target your Facebook ads within the channel, but it's not necessarily comparing to other channels. So let's focus on that for a second. Facebook versus display. Richard, make the argument for me whether or not if I'm a marketer and I have $100,000 to invest. No, let's make it more exciting. $10 million to invest.
That's a good
What is, when you're talking to someone, what's the justification for spending that money in Facebook versus in targeting display?
So as the author of Facebook Advertising for Dummies, I'm definitely bullish.
Perfect. That's what we need.
Facebook
Absolutely.
ad platform.
Great.
I think it offers by far many more ways to target your audience and find your customers, and also sort of the least expensive ways to reach that audience. They are display ads, though, so
Sure.
it's a little redundant.
You're a really nice guy.
Too nice, right? But specifically, if we look at the amount of conversions from display on Facebook versus display that might be targeted in social graph through the exchanges and otherwise, is it your position, Richard, that you would see more conversions on display ads on Facebook versus what these guys would offer?
Well, Facebook ads have a very low click-through rate right now. In fact, Facebook is unveiling a new ad platform on February 29th that should address that, and I've heard improves click-throughs by up to 40%. So I think that argument is tough to make right now, that I'll have more conversions. I think it's more about the greatest return on your investment. So it's the lowest cost per acquisition.
Okay.
Exactly. It's all about cost per acquisition and conversion. Click-through rates are a horrible metric. Everybody knows this. They don't correlate with conversions. It's been proven time and time again. We see that. It's really understanding the impact of your advertising campaign. Doesn't matter if it's cheap or expensive, what's the ROI? Much rather, and we charge, on a CPM basis, and we speak to our clients about this. We charge a higher rate, but it's because we're able to get your audience in the right environment, so there is going to be a higher level of conversion and a higher ROI. And that's the most important thing. It doesn't really matter about whether it's Facebook, on social networks, or off of it. It's, are they having the right environment for that person to then see the ad and then convert?
So your $10 million, if you had to pick your channel or Facebook, which one would you pick? You would pick your display.
I would
ads,
choose a web-wide approach, my channel.
Okay, fair enough. Ali, what else can you tell us in relation to this part of the conversation?
Well, I think the only thing that's frustrating about this conversation, is that we're continuing to only talk about cost per acquisition, cost per click, it's like, okay, and I hear at every conference like this that we go to, let's talk about how we're going to be a real medium. Finally, for 14 years, we've been talking about getting real lion's share of money, and we all sit up here and talk about conversions and cost per click and acquisition. And so if I had to only do acquisition and you said pick one or the other,
yeah.
Facebook or social graph, I'd say Facebook all day long. It's cheap, you have tonnage, it's a direct mail strategy all day long. Sign up, no question. But I don't think that's what any of our clients want to do. They want to say, how do I build a Facebook brand environment that's compelling? How do I leverage the Facebook environment, the Facebook advertising environment to drive real, meaningful traffic that's already in Facebook all the time to that destination? And then how do I spend the rest of the 75% of my budget that currently gets spent rest of web to reinforce the message, if I'm a CPG, about this brand page or about this experience? And I think chunking it up just does all of us a big disservice.
I think that's a good
But
comment.
it's about ROI. It's not about conversion. And I don't care if you're doing branding campaigns or you're doing mid-funnel or you're doing or bottom funnel tactics. It's all about ROI. And if you are doing and you're trying to drive prospects into the funnel and, you know, create your tunnel from a funnel, as you said earlier, it's still an ROI associated with that, and that's incredibly important.
Sure. I just haven't heard us talk about it, and this is not singling anyone out here. I just never really heard us talk about, okay, well, let's talk about the brand lift metrics on that. Tell me the research. And I think Facebook is making great strides. I mean, we're running ads on Facebook for several of our clients now. Like, I think Facebook's making great strides to say, let's, like, stop this moving bullet train and really start to evaluate more than just cost per like. Awesome. I mean, that's good for all of us as they do that.
So one of the things we're going to come to that point is, you know, who's really driving this conversation in the industry for social graph data. I think if you look at search and you look at other channels, historically they've had a lot of associations and industries and really sort of built up the industries. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. I think it's a good point. Nikhil, one quick question for you before we move on to some of the things. So
you mentioned touch on the previous thing.
No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead. Fine.
I mean, so, you know, just kind of generally, I mean, ROI is a funny word, right? And, you know, I think ROI is really defined by whoever's claiming what ROI means. So whether it's branding or whether it's not, you know, that's all fine and dandy. But the bigger point, and this is something that we see in our world, you know, closer and closer, is that the major shift that's happened kind of on the pure social side, I mean, not the social graph stuff, but really, again, just the platform-specific stuff, is that power has effectively shifted back to the supplies control. Right? Facebook owns its inventory. It's not extrapolated to another exchange or another ad network or another DSP. Twitter doesn't do the same, doesn't do that either. Neither does LinkedIn. Neither does any of these. Are essentially very large private exchanges. And to that point, you know, whatever the platform, the supply side wants to dictate as their ROI is effectively what kind of happens. So you start to see, again, you know, just through the Facebook UI, you start to see things change in really odd ways. You know, even if you looked at the S1 filing for Facebook, they mention advertising like 250 times. They hardly touch on clicks, impressions, or CPA at all, but they talk about GRPs and TRPs a whole ton. What the hell is a digital platform talking about GRPs and TRPs for? So I think ROI is a really interesting point, and whether it's top of the funnel or bottom of the funnel is really kind of a moot point. And when you start to think about the fact that the supply guy really has all the power here, and they can really dictate what ROI means.
Sure.
Actually, I disagree with that. It's the client. The client should be dictating what's the ROI.
And how to measure it. I think that's historically been true for the past kind of 10, 12 years. The problem is that Facebook doesn't have a problem saying, don't buy my inventory if you don't believe in what I'm trying to say.
Very true, but they're going to need to. Look at their revenue per page. Look at when they go public, there is going to be a large pressure coming from the marketplace for them to work on that. And
so Nikhil, what are some
Sure.
other sources outside of Facebook? You mentioned some other platforms you guys integrate with. What were the other ones?
So Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, StumbleUpon, and YouTube are the primary channels right now.
Okay, so if we mention those others quickly, just to put them in reference. I mean, so Facebook obviously is the 8 gajillion pound gorilla, but so basically we know that Twitter has now started some of the advertising, not necessarily as robust of an API at this point, but you know they're still developing a lot of things. What are some of the other major players in terms of people that you see that are, you know, not necessarily in the same tier as Facebook, but the companies that you work with? Who are the up and comers for other first party data advertising options? Yeah,
so I mean, if you think about it from a pure reach point of view, right, from a pure audience point of view, Facebook's something like 45% of total inventory across all those platforms, right? And again, if you think globally, you have more and more of these things existing, like Mixi in Japan, which is much larger than Twitter or Facebook, again, following the same principles. So what we start to see again is that, you know, it becomes problematic when you look at all those 5, 6 platforms as just one giant ad network. Right, meaning that, you know, if I complete my buy on social or Facebook, right, that means I'm done with social. So what we start to see is that, and you know, we made this mistake early on, was saying how can we create a lowest common denominator across all of these platforms when ultimately they're all very good at very particular things. Right, so again, you know, going back to the ROI discussion, the ROI kind of concept between Twitter and Facebook are two fundamentally different items.
Right.
And when you start to think about, you know, what type of messaging you can put on there and kind of what the creative looks like and all that type of stuff, it's a actually very revolutionary a change in the sense that a promoted tweet, you know, doesn't have the same forms of optimization as a rich media unit on display.
Sure. So just, and I know there's a lot of debate in terms of whether or not we should be talking about ROI and how do we define ROI and all those things, but let's go into the assumption right now that we are talking about just traditional, if I invest this much, I get this much return. So let's work under that definition for a second. So, I mean, you know, generally speaking, it seems like, you know, a lot of the transactions and conversions from Facebook advertising often happen within the environment of Facebook. So it's not necessarily on the consumer's website. Maybe you drive them back at Facebook, they do interactions, they convert there. So for the other big players in space, who we're talking about Twitter, we're talking about LinkedIn, we're talking about StumbleUpon. Is there anyone else really?
So to that point, all these environments have their own version of the fan page, right? If you think about Twitter's brand page, you think about LinkedIn company page, you think about StumbleUpon channels. They all have that same internal kind of structure, right? And
Google Plus now has brand pages. So for all of those, do any of those stand out in your mind as distinctly different? Meaning that if we go back to the model I just said, which is there's more likely that the conversion is going to happen within the community or the network. Not saying it's right or it's wrong, but just if a marketer said, I wanted to invest money to advertise on a social network to drive them to actually convert on my site, and the partners that you guys work with, do you see any of those saying, yes, that's what we do, and we're good at it, and we're about driving traffic to your site, and they convert on your site?
Yeah,
Who are those people?
I think one of the dark horse platforms that nobody really either talks about or likes to talk about is StumbleUpon, right? And StumbleUpon has built a really, really amazing sort of paid discovery platform that essentially takes the ad unit and kind of uses it as the URL of the page. So you can take any landing page, any conversion page, anything that has a URL effectively and dump it into the StumbleUpon system. And the other kind of fact that a lot of people, again, don't talk about, the StumbleUpon drives more referral traffic than kind of Facebook or Twitter or any of these kind of larger platforms, right? I think there's something like 1 billion to 1.5 billion stumbles monthly. So that's a massive platform. And from just a technology point of view, they're probably the second most stable system next to Facebook that's out there. And that's not saying Facebook's very stable at all.
And why do you think people don't really know about them in terms of an
I think some of it was deliberate in the sense that StumbleUpon themselves they don't like to make a lot of noise about it for whatever reason. But we found them to be a very, very big partner, and probably a good 60 to 80% of our customers run not just on Facebook but on StumbleUpon as well.
Okay, so now we're going to go down the row, and I just literally am going to give you 30 seconds or so, and just make your case. You have 30 seconds. Why should we work with 33 across? Just kind of sum it up based on some of the topics we talked about. And specifically, if you can cite, an example with a client or some data specific to 33 across, like why you guys, why not Andrew, and let's just take it from there.
First of all, you should work with all of us. There's plenty of I've been sitting next to Richard. His kindness is just oozing.
He's
off
got
of
like
me.
this perma smile,
You
like
do.
it doesn't
Are
just like
you from the
constantly. It's
Midwest?
like they're stitched up in the corner or something.
Okay.
Oh wow, it's shocking.
So I think why you should work with us is, I'll just give you a client example. So Jones, New York, right? A typical retailer, someone you would think is heavy DR, launching a female traveler wardrobe that they needed not only new awareness around, but also then actual revenue against and kind of new category footprint and traction within. So we built a brand graph for that specific initiative and for that specific audience. And that brand graph predicted about 14 million new consumers that we felt they should target. They then marketed to those 14 million consumers, which, by the way, indexed extremely high for video. So for Jones, New York, or any typical retailer, it's a really hard pill to swallow to say, invest in one of the most expensive units out there, video, right? Not so much. Like, they look back and say, it's crazy. But they did it, and they invested 30% of their budget to marketing to people in their brand graph. And that 30% drove 90% of all revenue for the campaign and improved whatever the clothing category, obviously not with me, but with someone, sorry, but improved brand awareness and favorability by combined 42%. And so not only did they move the brand needle with an important audience on a new product category that they needed validation they could compete in, they drove an enormous percentage of overall campaign revenue, and then they also exposed themselves to a huge predicted audience and got to test and really dip their toe in. Wow, I actually can effectively afford, with a hugely effective return on ad spend, even a premium unit if my audience is going to be most responsive to it.
So basically, use the data, they could see that from an audience of 1 million, based on the entire cookie pool that you guys will look at, to expand that to 13 or 14 million, that would somehow be favorable to the brand. And then specifically, not only did you guys buy that media on their behalf, but it was more specific to say, you should actually use this type of ad unit. Right. And that was an expensive one, but you guys made the case. And then you said basically it increased awareness. And was there also a defined percentage increase on like actual sales or conversions, or was that the goal? Or
It was 240% return on ad spend for them, which is how they were defining was basically ROAS. That and then brand lift. But I mean, we didn't necessarily make the recommendation. I mean, we called it out, but it's pretty prominent. They over-index so high for video that, you know, the agency and the client, to both their credit, were like, what is this? And how can we, like, it's hard to look the other way when it's the data. And so I think that's why, to us, having that physical graph that connects the brand with the social and interest graph is really critical.
so retail, that was a good category. What's the worst category in your opinion to use for social graph targeting?
Wow, that's such an interesting. I mean, I think the one that is hardest is pharma. I mean, I just think you get into a really, really, really sticky, privacy, messy, like connectivity because we're close does not, you know, other than maybe diabetes.
My
very
friend likes
little.
Ambien and sleeps great, so I should take it too, right? Yeah.
We'll get to that
Right.
later
Okay. Cool.
tonight,
Gotcha. Yeah.
right.
So after our date, yes. Richard, a few seconds. Like, so why work with you guys? What's so great?
Sure.
And show me some proof points.
Just to be clear, MicroStrategy is not an ad platform. We do not sell our data to advertisers. We're a very different proposition. We're all about knowing your customers, your fans, being able to segment, target, and message and monetize that fan base.
Who's your biggest competitor?
That's a good question. I guess Giga is in this space.
Gotcha, Giga. Okay. And so what is the key difference if someone's looking at Giga and you guys? Why you guys over them?
Well, we have a cloud platform. We have 20 years of expertise, and we know how to slice and dice data in a way that others can't follow. We also have a complete end-to-end solution. So aside from having analysis on this data, we have an ability to push out special offers and segment to that audience.
Okay.
An example of one of our clients is SC Barcelona. Any world soccer fans out there? All right.
Sounds like a
And
couple.
they have the largest following of any sports team, over 28 million fans on Facebook. And we're working with them to figure out ways to segment and monetize that audience.
Okay. In terms of case studies, like what can you tell me? You worked with someone and they increased by what? What can you tell me?
We're pretty new to the social suite enterprise
How old is
market,
the social suite?
We bowed it in August.
Okay.
And we
So
have
just
a
a few
couple
months.
reference clients right now.
Okay. So no definitive case studies, but in the works.
Very soon.
Okay. Andrew?
Yeah, so Media 6 Degrees, we've been doing this the longest. We created the space, actually. Our renewal rate with clients is 80%. And
Just quickly, what does that mean you created the space, just so I understand?
we created the term and the concept of social targeting.
Okay.
We actually own it. Not that we use it, but it's not that defensible. But no, we were the first ones in the market. We've been doing it that long. But anyway, I digress. In terms of case studies, we're very, very good as, you know, our focus is driving prospects. And we just completed a research study with Nielsen and the Cosmopolitan Hotel in Las Vegas, a new hotel that launched last year. And they were trying to drive new prospects for this brand. The results of it are that we were 7 times more effective than the control group at driving new prospects to the hotel site, you know, basically to raise awareness as well as the consideration set. We measured it not only against the competitors that they were running, but also the influence on search behavior. Were we able to increase the number of people driving search terms for Cosmo Hotel, Las Vegas hotels, vis-a-vis not only the Cosmo Hotel, but also vis-a-vis Bellagio, Wynn, their competitive set as well. And we were 7 times more effective at doing that than the control group.
Another category you can say might be the worst. Do you agree about pharma? Is there
We don't
another
touch pharma. We will not go near it. I don't believe that it is a good thing for our industry to be doing targeting in the pharma space.
What's another example of an industry that's the worst for?
We
social
do a
targeting?
lot of work in financial services, but it's one where you have to be very careful. The other is children's marketing. I would also say, don't touch it. Don't go near it.
Why?
Because you don't want to be targeting children. It doesn't pass the what we were talking about earlier, the creepy factor.
Yes. Creepy
Doesn't
pasta,
play
yes.
well in the news.
Okay, gotcha. So Nikhil, so obviously you guys are an ad management platform dedicated to social, focused on social. Are there a lot of players in that space yet compared to just more traditional ad management platforms, search, display? I mean, who are your competitors?
Yeah, so I mean, we kind of view our biggest competitive kind of set as the guys that have built sort of SEM platforms, search platforms that have now started to tack on Facebook and things like that. So
Maybe like IgnitionOne, possibly? No, it's fine.
no, but I mean, really, there's two lenses, right? Again, we talked about this earlier. I won't spend too much time on it, but there's one that says social is a pure extension of the rest of the internet, and we should be looking at it that way. There's another one that says this is fundamentally unique, and we should be coming up with brand new ways to approach it.
So specifically for social, like platforms that dedicated to social, what are a couple of the others out there you compete with?
So on the search side, again, you see the likes of the Marins and the Kenshus that are
For
out there.
Facebook specifically,
For Facebook
right?
specifically.
But what other platforms do we work like Stumble Upon?
Yeah, for other
and LinkedIn,
platforms,
Twitter?
there's a couple of agencies that have built sort of managed service practice around it, but beyond that, there isn't very much.
Right,
It's also testament to the fact that the space is very mature, right? There aren't dedicated pipes for a lot of these platforms for people to just plug into. We spend a lot of time an initiative internally for us is to be very preemptive about that and start to help a lot of these new guys, new supply sources that are, again, very large, build out those automated infrastructures and things like that.
Okay, great. So I'm going to ask a couple questions, and we'll go to the audience. How much time do I have, Steve? 5 minutes until the whole thing, or until I need to go to the audience for questions?
Let's make it 5 to Q&A.
Okay. Depends on how many people are walking out of the room at the end of the day, right?
I had one cool example, if you don't mind. To
So
share just one quick example
sure.
on something that we kind of. This is a new kind of pilot program that we've been playing
15
with.
seconds. 15, no.
We've been playing right now, but just getting back to kind of the ROI kind of
Yes.
thing that we're just talking about. Pizza is a really interesting sort of sector, right? They have a proven study that shows that their sales lift 3 to 6 times when it rains and snows, respectively, with different zips, essentially. So one thing that we did is we actually spent some time building integration into weather satellites. And actually took a real-time weather data and actually market all of this pizza company's media across Facebook and Twitter based on where it was raining and snowing. And you're able to see a very similar type of lift, that 3 to 6 times, which is, again, very interesting.
Gotcha. So we'll wrap up with this and then see if there's any questions to the room. I mean, in terms of the space that you're in, social graph data, there's always more concerns, I think, in that type of data in terms of protecting it, looking at relationships, et cetera. So as people that are in this space, what is the worst nightmare that you could face with your company in terms of you wake up in the morning and you see a headline in your company, something's happened with your data. Tell me what some of those scenarios are. Everyone's like, who's going to take this question? What can happen with social graph data that could be detrimental if it's not handled correctly and properly? What are some of those scenarios?
I mean, I think the worst that I think about, because our data set is kind of owned and operated now, so it's a little different that we're not, I don't worry about third-party data sources like I used to.
Yeah.
I think now the worst case is Jones, New York getting Macy's brand graph, Visa getting Amex's brand graph, and making sure that there is complete separation about what happens within a brand's individual graph, and that there is, I've heard some nightmare retargeting stories, particularly in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, oddly enough, that using Amex and Citibank data to market for Visa. And that shit scares the crap out of me.
And you guys, I assume, have competitive clients, right?
We have everyone in
right?
every category. I mean, we have an enormous, we have 350 active advertisers. So, that's the stuff that if I think about, just internal controls and training, that's the stuff, that's the other side of privacy that I don't think I feel like we've got some nice keys and we need to protect them.
Sure. Andrew,
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, I mean, we, as I mentioned earlier, we don't collect any of the information or data that anybody would find interesting. If our database was opened up, you'd just see encrypted cookie IDs, which you can't tie back to an individual, visiting encrypted URLs. That's all we have. So for me, it's more my concern industry-wide. Used to be very involved with the NAI, and there was a lot of discussion about offline data and bringing it online. And for me, the biggest concern is data breaches once lots of, and it's happening now, a lot of offline data coming online. And the industry has to be very careful with that stuff, because otherwise we could all wind up suffering if there's a big data breach and all of a sudden, Experian data is wide open for everybody to see.
Okay, cool. Were you going to say something?
I mean, I guess the only thing I would add to that is kind of, again, government intervention, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff happening in Europe right now, which is a whole ton of fun.
It's
And,
an election year. Nothing will happen this year. They're all using that data anyway, so no one's going to do shit. Sorry, I live in D.C., so a little jaded.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily have any comment on that, but just to say that that's something to be aware of. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think in Europe specifically, the stringency on the privacy regulations is much more difficult. Steve, maybe go to questions from the audience. See if
Tony Jarvis, Olympic Media Consultancy. Ali, I think there's going to be a lot of men waiting for dates afterwards, so you better be aware of that. And a question.
Awesome, successful trip. Yeah.
is he talking to me? Or
Hi,
is
yes,
that me? No, I think he's
yeah.
talking to you. I don't know.
Awareness, conversion.
Okay, got it.
Question for you. Could you explain a little bit more about how you were able to tease out on the your retail example, how you were able to attribute, I think you said 90% of the sales to social? Presumably they were running other media, beyond digital, maybe something very ordinary like magazines, newspapers.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So that's an all digital stat. So it's if you have 100% of their digital budget, 30% was allocated to marketing to the cookies in their brand graph, and those cookies drove 90% of all revenue.
What about the ROI of compared to other media that was part of the campaign?
I don't know the answer to that.
If I'm the marketer,
yeah,
I need that answer, don't I?
Yeah, I think that if you're the digital marketer within Jones, New York, right, or at Media Contacts, right, if you're that your realm is identifying the most effective digital strategies. But I'm happy to put you in touch with those guys. They're incredibly forthcoming. They're really open about data sharing. So if you give me your card after, I'll intro you to those guys.
Good. All right. Thanks so much, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank